Today, we are have a really, I think, uh, interesting and hopefully engaging session on addressing student behaviors during distance learning. COVID-19 has definitely changed our world, changed our lives, and I think today's session will really delve into what you can do as a parent, as an educator, as a concerned friend, as a caregiver, how we can help our kids with disabilities get through this very trying time. So just a couple of ground rules. Oh, and I'm introduced Dr. Daniel Gulchak with COI Education, and he will be leading a lot of the session today, along with Amanda Glass and Reynaldo Fowler of the Arizona Center for Disability Law.
Hey, well, I'm really excited to be here. Let's start out with a big thank you to the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Network for hosting this, as well as the Arizona Center for Disability Law. We're really excited that all of you could join us. I see in the chat, thank you for sharing your information. Let us know where you're coming from. We see that we've got people from all across the state, and I even saw folks from North Dakota and South Dakota. So welcome, you guys. Welcome to Arizona, and I guess really we can be anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and start off here just by introducing myself. I'm Dr. Daniel Gulchak, former classroom teacher, special education teacher for over a decade, working with kids with significant intellectual and physical disabilities, as well as kids with behavioral challenges. I have a PhD from Arizona State University, and I've been faculty at NAU. I currently teach graduate classes at Arizona State University. I'm also the immediate past president of our Arizona Council for Exceptional Children, and I've served on the board for Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders for several years. And I'm a dad. I have two daughters. I have a tween and a teen, and both of them are doing school virtually. So I'm with you. I'm fighting that battle as well, and overcoming those challenges like all of us. So let's go ahead and jump in here to our day. We've got really three big objectives that we want to cover today. You got this. I mean, let's talk about that. Let's share and celebrate our successes, because whether you feel successful or not, I know there's some successes out there. And then we're going to get into some tips for home and tips from school. But first, we want to poll the audience. So Jeff, can you put up our poll? We want to kind of take up the temperature, feel out the climate, and see how you're doing. Thanks. And I see the chats are still coming in, so thank you very much for sharing and letting us know a little bit about yourself. I see a lot of friends and colleagues in the audience, so thank you for joining us. It's great to see you. Really diverse crowd. We're excited about that. We have about 80% of the people that have responded to the chat so far. And I think we're going to wrap that up in a couple of seconds. I see we have a lot of parents of children with special needs on our call today and on our webinar, so thank you for being here. Okay, Jeff, I think we've got most of the people polled. All right, cool. So the results of this poll that are showing you, we use the red, yellow, green zone, and these come from zones of regulation. And Jeff is going to go ahead and post a link where you can get a free resource. But using this zone approach to kind of see how you're feeling, it's something that we can do at school as well as at home to help our children, to help our students really kind of to express their feelings, right? We kind of go back to that name it and tame it. So and I think, Jeff, if you have that link to zones of regulation, you can download a free handout, and it's great to have. And it's a really good tool for parents and teachers alike. So thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in a little bit more, shall we? All right, so we want to start with this. You, it really is you. When we talk about challenging student behavior, it begins and ends with you. So let's start with parents. Parents, you're your child's first teacher. You really got this. But what we need to know is that in order for us to regulate our children, we've got to be regulated ourselves, because an unregulated adult can't regulate anybody else. So we got to make sure, parents, that we're taking care of our wellness. So how do we do that? How does that help our kiddos? Well, we want to model that social and emotional wellness, connecting with others, share our mental wellness. What does that look like? It's having positive thoughts, sharing your hopes, sharing your dreams, as well as our physical wellness. Make sure that we're eating healthy, recreating, whether that's exercising, whether that's walking, whether that's doing yoga, whatever you need to take care of yourself. But that's really critical. Teachers, educators, we've got a lot of folks from all spheres of education with us today. You got this because your power is backed by EBP. And all of us in the industry know that's evidence-based practice. Everything that we're doing, that we are doing with our kiddos, with our students, should be backed by research and evidence, so that we know that it is scientifically proven to be effective. And there's a couple of things that we can do with that. And three things are being consistent, predictable, and equitable. So having consistent routines and strategies, being predictable with our rules and consequences so kids know what's coming next. And of course, making sure that we're being equitable. That doesn't mean equal, but equitable means that we are being consistent with our rules, with our consequences, and with our accountability. So let's keep moving on. Let's talk about students. What power do students bring to the table? Well, we often, talk about our students, and we complain about the 3Ds, right? We complain that kids are defiant, disruptive, and disrespectful. However, there's strengths buried in those 3Ds. And those strengths that our students bring to the table are resourcefulness, resilience, and being reactive. And so that could seem like bad things. And maybe as a parent, we might not appreciate that reactiveness, but let's dig a little bit deeper, right? Resourceful. Our kids can figure out shortcuts, cheats, and hacks. And that's not a bad thing. They can figure out how to get school done quicker and easier. And so if we're not providing strategies for them, a lot of times they can figure out those strategies themselves. That's awesome. Resilience. Sometimes when we think resilience, we're thinking stubbornness, closed-mindedness, oppositional, but that resilience, it's that I can try, it's that get her done attitude. So we really want to acknowledge that. And being reactive, well, that could be explosive, but it could also mean that our kids take charge and they lead movements. And so we need leadership. So those are all really great things. So let's go ahead and take a second to pause. We're going to break you into breakout groups loosely based on how you categorized yourself when you registered. But this breakout group is going to give you a chance to verbalize and to share for just 5 minutes. How do you got this? Share a success you've had with school through your role. Jeff, let's send people to breakout. I hope everybody had a small chance to kind of share some successes that you've had in school, because I mean, look, I've been looking at the chat while you guys were in breakouts. My goodness, we have a universe of expertise in this room with us. So I hope you guys are doing some networking, and we're relying on each other, because we really have to. I mean, we can crowdsource some information, and there are experts in every sort of field with us today. So we definitely want to hear from you and for you to share your expertise and knowledge as well. All right, so let's go ahead and jump on and let's keep moving forward. So we're going to start today with tips from home. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to ask you to share one big takeaway, either from the tips for home or the tips for school section. So kind of keep that in mind. We're going to have another breakout room later on where you can share your big takeaway. All right, so what's the big picture for tips from home? Consistency. If you remember one word when you leave here today, it's consistency. That really is key to success for helping our children learn at home, and especially our kiddos that have more behavioral challenges. And so parents, let me give you 3 tips, 3 things that we can do that will help us with our consistency at home. So number 1 is we want to set expectations. Now, that doesn't mean being mean and punishing kids, but when I talk about setting expectations, I'm talking about your expectations for, maybe it's your bedtime routine. So our bedtime routine is always, mobile devices off, brush teeth, let's read a book together, and then lights out. What's our morning routine? Maybe it's the alarm comes on, you got to get dressed, have a bit of cereal, and then get online or leave for school. What's our homework routine? What's our routine before we leave the house if we have to go grocery shopping? But you want to have consistent routines. That will really help with behavior. Second, movement. Here's a quick tip that I learned from another parent who has a child that really just kind of can't sit still, or some of our younger kiddos. And what they do is they make sure that they have a different type of chair for every single school class. So maybe they start in the morning sitting for their first period class on a regular chair. Second period class, they move to a ball. Third period class, they move to some place where they can stand, maybe at a tall table, maybe at a bookshelf, where your laptop is up a little bit higher so that you're standing for the next period. And then they move to a different chair. So it's really important to have that movement and set that expectation. And finally, breaks. We've got to take breaks between class. As I said, I'm a parent. I've got two teens, teen and a tween, that are learning online. And so one of our expectations is, in between class, you got to get up, go take a walk outside, stand up, go get a drink of water, but you need to stand, you need to move between classes. So set expectations. Number two, provide acknowledgement. We've all heard the phrase, you catch more flies with honey. Well, it's actually scientifically true, not just for honey, but for people as well. And scientifically, what we know is that we want to have a ratio of 4-to-1, a ratio of 4 positive comments to 1 corrective feedback or error correction. That's really tough to do, but what that does is it really builds behavior momentum. And so does choice, making sure that we give our children choices. So maybe that's, hey, for this next class period, why don't you go and sit or stand at your desk? Great choice, right? Your child most likely is going to pick one of those, and it doesn't matter which one they pick, but they made the choice, and that gives you a chance to reinforce, hey, thanks for following my direction. And then you can do something else really simple like that, like go ahead and make sure that you are logged into your classroom. And another chance for you to say, great job, I really appreciate you following my direction. So by building behavior momentum with little things, then you can ask for maybe a non-preferred activity. Okay, let's go ahead and do 5 of our math questions. But if you've already gotten the yes, 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 and they've had a free choice 1, 2, 3 times, that third time that the request comes from you, it's a little bit easier to swallow. Finally, variety with your reinforcements. You don't always have to say good job, good job, good job, good job. We want to make sure that that reinforcement is earned, right? We're not saying it for nothing, but it could be nonverbal, right? It could be a gesture, fist bump, blow it up. It could be non-tangible. Maybe it's extra privileges. Hey, tell you what, you get through this one essay and you and me will bake some cookies today before supper, okay? Or after supper, whatever it is. But we want to provide that acknowledgement. Next, consistent accountability. And I'm not talking about punishment or being mean here, but what I'm talking about is making sure that you talk about what you want your child to do rather than not walk, or rather than what you don't want them to do. So, an example is, we see it posted all the time, no smoking, no drinking, no running, no hitting. It's like, great. So what do you want the child to do? So my advice for parents and families and teachers as well is, when you provide that redirection, when a child's not doing something that you want, instead of saying, don't do that, redirect them and tell them what you want them to do. Let's return to our desk. Please sit down. Come over here. Read your book, right? But we want to give them some redirection using that same words every time and going back to your expectations. So rather than stop being disrespectful, don't be disruptive. Let's go back to, hey, we're respectful in this house. We use kind words. So keep using those phrases. And finally, the last piece of advice here is, say it, don't spray it. So what do I mean by that? That means that if you're not going to follow through on your direction or request, don't say it. Because every time that we break a promise or say, I'm going to give you one more chance. Okay, one more chance. This is your last chance. really what we're saying is that there's no consistency. So if you're not going to follow through and if you don't mean it, don't say it. Instead, let's go back to this advice of being consistent. Provide redirection by telling the student what you want them to do rather than what you don't want them to do. So at this point, I want to hear your opinions. And you can go ahead and put your opinions in the chat, but I'd like you to share with me what are some other ideas and examples of expectations, acknowledgement, and ways that we can hold our kiddos accountable. Go ahead and jot it down in your chat, please, and I'm going to be monitoring that. So Jeff did say that the PowerPoint today will be shared following the session, so you'll all get my PowerPoint. Lauren's talking about, providing accommodations to take breaks, and these things help tremendously. Thanks for sharing, Lorraine. If you have any other suggestions, go ahead and put it in the chat. Vicky, thanks for your comment. Calm tone of voice. Yeah. And that goes back to that emotional regulation, right? An unregulated adult can't regulate a child. So we really have to monitor our regulation, take care of our wellness, our physical, our emotional, and our social. And it's a chore, but it's something that we have to do intentionally. And it's something that I have to do all the time because I know it'll benefit my students as well as myself. Kendra, a schedule. Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much. Incentives for finishing work. When you finish such and such, then you can take or have a break or do something. Thanks, Lena. Donna, great comment. Ooh, hands, first, then schedules. I like that. Yeah, we know that schedules work really well, right? That's kind of akin to social stories. So having that schedule, whether it's a picture communication schedule, whether it's written down, or whether you're just telling the kids, your children ahead of time, we're going to do this, then this, then this, really helps them regulate. Okay. Israel is talking about a social contract. Kin's talking about a safe, conductive learning environment. Yeah, really set that environment up. Preferred activity that students can earn as a group. Nice. Thanks, Molly. Yeah, those are all great ideas. So I'm going to ask you to keep those coming in, and I'm going to go ahead and share some ideas for what we can do when our children transition back to the classroom. And again, whether that's attending classroom virtually for our teachers and educators, or they're physically in the classroom. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about tips to school. And again, I want you to keep in mind that we're going to have a breakout at the end of my session, and I'm going to ask you to share a tip or takeaway, either from tips for home or tips to implement. All right, ladies and gentlemen, for those of us in the education field, we've heard this before: rapport before rigor. Absolutely, positively, number one. People, children, students, they need to know that you care before they care what you know. And I think about that every time that I'm teaching or even in front of other adults. People need to know you care before they care what you know. That's 100% true. And if we work on building that rapport and relationships with our kiddos, so many behavior problems and behavior challenges are taken care of automatically. So here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to share with you 10 classroom management strategies that are absolutely guaranteed. And I really do mean guaranteed or your money back. Guaranteed to increase rapport and decrease challenging behaviors. And I can tell you that these are guaranteed because they're evidence-based, they're research-based, they're tried and tested, and they just work. And you don't have to copy these down or write frantically, because I'm going to give you a link to a handout and a free self-assessment that you can use for yourself, either at home or in the classroom. So what's that number one classroom management intervention? It's you. It's the teacher. Teacher-mediated interventions are crazy powerful. Many of us in the education industry have heard about John Hattie's visible learning, and we're a little bit familiar with meta-analysis research, meta-analysis studies. All of these are based on meta-analysis data. These are things that are guaranteed to work. So let me run through them very quickly. And again, Jeff's going to post a link. And actually, Jeff, you can even post that link now, and then we'll post it at the end. So you can get this handout. So, let's kind of run through these things really, really quickly. Number one, having behavioral expectations. Make sure that you post them, that you define them, that you teach them. So in a school environment, maybe that's being safe, respectful, responsible. Maybe that's being kind and accountable and honest or trustworthy. Whatever your expectations are, we need to define those expectations. So what does respect look like? Well, that means, using kind or considerate language and raising your hand and waiting to be called on before speaking. What does respectful mean? Well, that means using courteous language if you're in high school. Maybe it's using nice words if you're a preschooler. But we want to teach those expectations. Second, we want to have a reinforcement system. I'm not talking about tokens, tickets, and M&Ms, but I'm talking about a system. We want to have a defined system in our classroom where we have frequent, intermediate, and long-term reinforcements. So again, that could be tickets, it could be tokens, it could be attaboys, it could be putting work up. It could be verbal, gestural, tangible. And we want to have that high frequency. It's got to be 4-to-1 of positive feedback to corrective feedback. That's critical. And we've got studies longer than my arms that prove that decreases behavior problems and builds rapport with our kiddos. An accountability system. This isn't discipline. This isn't punishment, but it is holding kids accountable to our expectations. If we say that we're going to be respectful and using nice words, we're using kind and courteous language in a high school environment, and kids are swearing or using profanity, well, that doesn't match our expectation. That is not kind and courteous. So what's the accountability there? And I really encourage you to have a behavioral flow chart and write it out. The first time that you don't meet our expectation, I'm going to provide a redirection. Hey, our expectation, our poster on the wall says, we want to be respectful by using kind words. What you said wasn't kind words. Let's use kind words in our classroom. The second time, well, maybe it's a reflection, or maybe it's a reteach. It's like, hey, remind me again, remember our expectation is being respectful. What does that look like in the classroom? You don't remember? Well, it's right there on the poster. What does the poster say? Yeah, that's it. So we can do that redirect. And then maybe it's a reteach. And then maybe it's an office referral, because we want to be tracking behaviors and when students aren't meeting our expectation, because we don't want to sound like a broken record. If we've already done that 3, 4, 5 times, what does that tell us? It tells us that accountability system doesn't work for this child, for this behavior. We've got to do something different. And that's the power of having a consistent, equitable discipline or an accountability system for office referrals. Classroom routines. We've talked about that when we talked about parents. Classroom routines for what do you do when you walk into the classroom? Where do you find the link to log in? What do you do if you need to sharpen your pencil, get a drink of water? How do you hand in work? Where's the inbox? Where's the outbox? Where's our bell work? We want to make sure that we have all of these systems and that we teach them to our students. Physical arrangement is equally important for decreasing classroom behavior problems. Now, of course, we have to be, 6 feet apart and having that space, but we want to make sure that we're in a space so that we can get close to students if we need to. If there's a challenge, we can have that physical proximity, or it's having that teacher look. But even with online systems, we can still look at our physical infrastructure, making sure we're monitoring the chats, making sure we have our cameras on or the child logs on, whatever your physical arrangements are. So let's keep going down this list. I know this is really quick, but I'm going to provide that handout for you. And I see that Jeff has already posted that link in the chats. Active supervision. What does that mean? It's moving and scanning during instruction and interacting frequently and positive with our students. Whether we're in a physical environment, that's physically scanning and moving around. If we're in a virtual environment, well, that means we're checking the chat. We're checking the video feeds. We're asking if kids have any questions. Opportunities to respond, OTR is critical. And I've tried to monitor that here, haven't we? Right? We've had several times where I've asked you questions. I've asked you to put something in the chat, because having that interaction and soliciting feedback. Maybe it's questions, maybe it's a quick answer, maybe it's a gesture, maybe if it's raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Do you agree? Do you disagree? But having that check for understanding is really critical to decrease behavior problems. The more kids are engaged, the less problems we're going to have. And that holds true for the next one. Number 8 is AET. When we look at the research, academic engaged time is critical. The less time that you're talking and kids are engaged, the less problem behaviors we're going to have. So we've got to make sure that we're prioritizing teaching and learning. So what does that look like? Well, that means that instead of you talking, your students are reading, they're writing, they're discussing, they're interacting, they're cooperating, they're collaborating, they're sharing, and they're working. So that's what academic engaged time means. We want to structure that and plan that as educators to make sure that our kids are working harder than we're working. And our teachers are working really hard right now. Everybody in our education system is. Number 9, differentiated instruction. What does that mean? Well, it just means that kids need different types of instruction. And so we want to prioritize that individualization. So maybe one child needs 5 minutes to complete an activity. Maybe another child needs 15. That's differentiating instruction. Maybe one child can do 10 questions in 5 minutes. Another child is working just as hard, but they can only get through 2 questions. Well, then we can work to differentiate that instruction, to provide those accommodations, whether they're low tech or whether they're high tech. And finally, learning modalities. Forget what you think you know about I'm an auditory learner, I'm a visual learner, I'm a kinesthetic learner. That's not what I'm talking about learning modalities. Those things have more to do with the type of content that you're teaching, right? So some things have to be taught visually. Some things, like how to play sports, is best taught kinetically, physically. But what I'm talking about is using multiple modalities for your teaching. So not just lecture, but having large group, having small group, having videos, having different ways that content's presented. Maybe it's computer assisted instruction for one part. Maybe it's media or videos. Maybe it's going online. Maybe it's cooperative learning. Maybe it's jigsaw. Maybe it's independent study. But we know that when we have multiple modalities, we have less behavior challenges in our classroom. Whew, well, that's a big list, isn't it? But here's how you can manage that. And again, I want to turn your attention to the chat. Jeff put that link in the chat for you. And so you can download that free classroom management inventory from our website. That URL is in the link. And I encourage you to share that. It's free to share with all of your teachers, educators, but it really is a self checklist. And everything on this list is researched, evidence-based, and proven to decrease challenging behaviors in school. All right, so we're going to move now to the last activity. And this is one more breakout activity, and I told you this was coming. And so here it is. Jeff's going to send you to a breakout, and I want you guys to share one tip or one takeaway from Tips for Home or Tips from School. We'll see you in 5 minutes. Well, I hope everybody had a good breakout session. I hope you had at least a little bit of time to share your opinion, talk to other people about what you learned and what you're going to take away. There's no way for any of us to implement all of these things at once. So really the best strategy is to pick one thing. Pick one thing and try it. And if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't work, try something else. But there's a lot of ideas here. So yeah, Jeff's going to send you the slide presentation. So you'll have that. You'll have all that information. And I think most of us are back now. Jeff shared the URL, and I just shared it again for that free classroom management inventory. So please download that and feel free to share it. It's Creative Commons license, which means you can share it with anybody and copy it. All right, so today, just kind of to wrap up, just to remind you, you've got this. Whether you're a parent, an educator, or a student, you've got this. You've got skills, and there's a lot that you can do, and I'm sure you're already succeeding. We got to give ourselves some credit and give ourselves some grace. Hopefully you've enjoyed these tips from home and tips from school. If you'd like to contact me, I'm Dr. Daniel Gulchak. Please reach out to me at koi-education.com, or through our phone and email. But I really enjoyed being with you today. And now I'm going to turn things over to Amanda from Arizona Center for Disability Law. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gulchak. That was an incredible presentation. You know, a short amount of time, but a lot of really great tips and tricks that you were able to share. So thank you so much for your time and expertise. And I hope everyone on the call, whether you're a teacher, a parent, a therapist, that you got something out of that, because I thought it was really impressive, and I learned a lot myself. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and I'm going to do a much shorter presentation. But as Dr. Gulchak said, my name is Amanda Glass. I work at the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and I am an attorney who primarily represents students and families in special education disputes. Pretty quickly, ACDL, the Arizona Center for Disability Law, we are Arizona's nonprofit protection and advocacy agency. So every state and territory in Arizona has a P&A, or protection and advocacy system, like ours. And we offer free legal services, resources, information to anyone in the state with a disability. Today, and this is sort of I'm a lawyer, I got to do a little disclosure statement at the beginning. Even though I'm a lawyer, I am not your lawyer. I'm not representing you or your student today. And the information I'm sharing is really just general information. But please do be aware that laws change all the time. And so what I'm sharing today may not be true, you know, a few weeks from now if there are congressional legislative changes. So please, you know, if you're in a situation where you need representation, please do seek out your own attorney. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the legal protections that exist for our students with disabilities when it comes to school discipline. So Dr. Gulchak gave parents and educators a lot of really great tips about how to practically manage behaviors and keep kids, you know, engaged and being positive. But what happens when a kiddo isn't engaging and we are resorting to discipline? There are some protections in the law that exist if a student has a disability. And I'm hopeful that this information will be useful to you if you're a parent or advocate, because you'll understand your child's rights and how to protect them. And if you're a teacher, a therapist, a school administrator, hopefully this will just be a refresher of information you already know, but kind of letting you know what those students' rights are and how you need to proceed to protect them in your role when you are looking at discipline for a student. So as I said, for kiddos with disabilities, there are some procedural protections that exist when it comes to school discipline. However, what those protections are will depend on the child's status. So if the child has an IEP, which is the Individualized Education Program, or if they have a 504 plan, or if they don't have either of those yet, but we think it's pretty likely they have a qualifying disability, they just haven't been identified up to this point. So before I go to the next slide, I'm going to ask Jeff, we're going to do a quick instant poll, taking one of Dr. Gulchak's tips about keeping the audience engaged. We're going to do a quick instant poll just to find out from the audience if you're familiar with what's called a manifestation determination. And I'm going to go over what that is. So if you have no idea, that's fine. But I kind of just want to get a feel from the audience about what everybody's level of familiarity is. So I see results coming in. We have quite a few, I'm guessing probably mostly teachers and admin who have been to multiple manifestation determinations. So you're probably pretty familiar. We also have a significant number who have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's okay because I'm gonna go over it. And then some people in the middle, you've heard of it or you've gone to one before. Okay, awesome. We can go ahead and end the poll. Beautiful. Thank you all for participating. So now I'm going to go ahead and go over what that is. All right. So if a student has an IEP, they do have some protections. However, they can be short-term suspended without any additional protection or process, just like any other student. And we call suspensions that are for 10 or fewer school days short-term suspensions. I'm going to talk about the difference or whether that has to be cumulative or consecutive days or if it could be cumulative within a school year. That's on the next slide. But just keep in mind 10 or fewer is a short-term suspension. However, if a student has an IEP, they are protected from long-term suspension or expulsion. It could still ultimately happen, but before it could happen, there are some processes that we have to go through. And again, a long-term suspension is going to be 11 or more school days. And expulsion typically means you're removed for the rest of the school year or longer. And what expulsion looks like will depend on the school district or charter that your child is enrolled in. So this manifestation determination I was talking about, what is that? So if a school is looking at long-term suspending, so again, that means 11 or more school days suspended or expelling a student, and that student has an IEP, before that discipline can proceed, the school has to hold what's called a manifestation determination hearing or review within 10 school days of the decision to remove the child. And that manifestation determination is going to look like an IEP meeting. So you're going to have the same cast of characters you would see at a regular IEP. You're going to have special ed teacher, gen ed teacher, parents, anyone who parent wants to invite who has knowledge of the student. Sometimes the student themselves, if that's appropriate. You're going to have a school administrator. So the same people who would be at an IEP meeting, but instead of going through the IEP, setting goals, updating present levels, you're going to instead be focusing on these two questions. First, was the student's behavior, that breach of the code of conduct, was it caused by, or does it have a substantial relationship to the student's disability? And the second question, was the student's behavior a direct result of the school's failure to implement the student's IEP? So if the answer to either of those questions is yes, it was related to their disability, or yes, it was a result of the school's failure to implement the IEP, then the student has to be immediately returned to their original placement. So we cannot proceed with that long-term suspension or expulsion. They get to go back to school. And essentially what we're finding at that point is we are not meeting this child's disability related needs if they're engaging in this type of behavior. And we know that the behavior is a result of their disability. So what we're going to need to do is come up with a solution. We're going to need to revise that IEP, or if the IEP is great, but we're not implementing it appropriately. For example, Dr. Gulchak talked a lot about consistency with behavior plans. So maybe this kiddo has the best behavior plan ever, but only some of the teachers are following it. And therefore it's not being effective and the child is continuing to act out. So we got to figure out where is the failing here. Either we need to add services, change goals, change placement, add some more supports, or maybe we need to do some training with our staff, make sure everybody's on the same page and implementing things correctly. But no matter what, these shortcomings have to be addressed. And typically, because discipline results from behavior, that might involve conducting a functional behavioral assessment, which is an assessment that tries to figure out the function of a child's targeted behavior. So are they doing this to get attention from peers, to get attention from teachers? Are they doing it to avoid work? Are they doing it to fulfill a sensory need? Why are they acting out the way they are? Some kiddos may already have had an FBA conducted, and now we're going to need to do a new one because clearly we're still not meeting their needs. Some kiddos may have never had one conducted before, so this will be the first time, and we'll be able to create for the first time an effective behavior intervention plan for that student. Now, what happens if the student's behavior was not a manifestation? So that team got together and asked those two questions and decided, nope, the school is implementing the IEP just as it's written. And no, we don't think that behavior had anything to do with the child's disability. When that's the determination, then the discipline can proceed just as it would for any other student. So they can be removed for more than 10 days, or they can be expelled. Now, of course, you can't discipline them more severely than you would a non-disabled student. That would be discriminatory. But you are able to move forward as you would for a regular ed kid. However, one major difference is that if a student has an IEP, you can remove them, but the school is still responsible for providing them with the services listed in their IEP during the disciplinary period. So if we're suspending them for 15 days, that doesn't mean that they don't get anything for 15 days. They may have to be at home or be in an alternative school, but they're going to get the services, the speech therapy, the behavior help, the specially designed instruction, whatever's in their IEP, they need to continue to get that, but they can get it in an alternative setting. So they may not be in the regular class that they're normally in, but they're going to get those services. So really, a student with an IEP should never go longer than 10 days without receiving the services in their IEP. Now, there are some additional procedural safeguards beyond the manifestation determination. When a team is looking at moving a child because of discipline, they're going to need to issue prior written notice of that change, just like you would with any other change in placement. On the date when that decision is made to remove the child in a way that constitutes a disciplinary change of placement, the LEA or the school needs to notify parents about that decision and provide them with a copy of their procedural safeguards. If the team decides that the behavior was not a manifestation, so they go to that meeting, it wasn't related to the disability and it's not because the school failed to implement the IEP, and we're going to move forward with that disciplinary removal, parents at that point have the right to request what's called expedited due process to challenge the finding about the manifestation determination. So ultimately at that meeting, everyone's going to say their piece. I think it was a manifestation and here's why. I think it wasn't a manifestation and here's why. But at the end of the meeting, ultimately the school, whoever's representing the school, an administrator or principal, superintendent, special ed director, they're going to have the final say on whether it was a manifestation or not. And then if parents disagree and want to challenge that decision, they can do so through an expedited due process. And expedited just means that it's going to happen on a timeline that's a little more compact than a normal due process hearing timeline. Like I said, I was going to address consecutive versus cumulative. So for sure, if we're looking at a consecutive removal, let's say 15 days in a row, that would trigger the need for a manifestation determination. Sometimes a child will engage in behaviors resulting in multiple short-term suspensions. So you've got 2 days here, 3 days there, and eventually they've been out of school for more than 10 days in a school year. It just wasn't in a row. If you can demonstrate that those shorter-term removals constitute a pattern, so typically that would mean the kiddo's behavior is similar. It's that they're disrupting the class over and over, or it's physical aggression over and over, and maybe being triggered by the same things or in the same type of environment. But if you can show that that's a pattern, then you can actually look at the cumulative number of suspensions. So days out of the classroom, even if it was just a couple at a time, if now they've added up to more than 10, you could ask for a manifestation determination at that point. Most schools that I've worked with are very willing to have that meeting because it's just a way to meet the child's needs. It's not, it's not adverse. It should not be adversarial in any way. It's a way to say, clearly there's something going on with this kiddo and we need to revisit as a team and see if we can better meet their needs. But if you did get a challenge and they said, well, it hasn't been 10 days in a row and we're not looking at cumulative, there's some evidence out there and case law that you do want to look at cumulative when it's a pattern. Now, there are exceptions because we do need to keep our kids safe at school. So there are some types of behaviors that are considered to be so egregious that the child is not going to be protected in the same way if that's the behavior they engage in. So if the behavior involves weapons, but it's not any weapon, it's not just a sharp pencil, it's a weapon as defined by the US Criminal Code, drugs as defined by the Controlled Substances Act, or serious bodily injury to another person as described by the US Criminal Code, then that rule prohibiting expulsion or suspension for longer than 10 days doesn't apply. Instead, the district can decide unilaterally to remove that child to an alternative setting for no more than 45 days. So you don't have to have the manifestation. The school can say, you brought a gun to school, you have to be removed without any further process for up to 45 days. Now, while the child is in that alternative setting, hopefully the team is getting together, discussing how we're going to meet this child's needs going forward, because the child is still a child entitled to a free and appropriate public education. but perhaps it is not safe for them to be in the environment they were in before. So those are the exceptions to the manifestation determination requirement. Now, what about kiddos who have 504s? They don't have IEPs. More or less, it's the same as what I've just described. The only difference for a kid with the 504 is that they are not entitled to receive services in an alternative setting during the time that they're removed, but they still can ask for a manifestation determination. And if it's found that their behavior was a manifestation, they should be allowed to go back to their original placement. The only difference is if it wasn't a manifestation and they are going to be suspended or expelled, there's no entitlement to receive services in that alternative setting. Quickly, for kids who don't have an IEP or a 504 plan, what can we do for them? So they violated the code of conduct, but they don't have any recognized disability through a plan. So what we can do at that point is look at whether the school had knowledge that the child had a disability before that behavior happened. And the way the law defines that, there's really 3 ways you could prove it. So the parent of the child had expressed in writing to admin at the school that they believed the child had a disability and might need special education. Or the parent had requested an evaluation and that evaluation hadn't been conducted, so the child hadn't been identified. Or the teacher of the child or other personnel at the school has expressed concern about a pattern of behavior to someone in administration, but nothing was done. So if any of those 3 apply, you could then say, well, the school had knowledge, they just hadn't evaluated or hadn't completed the evaluation. So we're going to ask for manifestation determination, even though there's no IEP or 504 plan at this point. And then what about those kiddos who we did not know, and the school had no way of knowing? In that case, that child is going to be subject to discipline, just like a regular education student would be. However, the option for parents at that point is to request an expedited evaluation for initial identification. The law doesn't define how long a school has to do an expedited evaluation. They have 60 calendar days for a regular evaluation. So expedited, I would think, would be less than 60 days, but there's no exact time frame laid out in the law. And until that evaluation is completed, the child will remain in that disciplinary placement. They're not coming back to school in the same placement they were in previously. So you do have options. If you believe your child is entitled to a manifestation determination review, which I'm abbreviating as MDR up there, and the school is not moving forward with it, of course, the first step is to informally request it, send some emails, send a letter, call the special ed director. But if they're just refusing to do it and you truly believe your child is entitled, you can file what's called a state complaint with the Arizona Department of Education. You need to do it. I mean, in this case, you would want to do it immediately, but it would have to be filed within 1 year of the non-compliance. And there's a link in this slide, and you'll be receiving copies of these slides. It's really simple to do, a very user-friendly website where you can just fill in the facts and submit it, and then you'd be contacted by the Department of Education and an investigator who would look into your claims. I know we are pretty much out of time. I'm just going to quickly go through a couple scenarios that students might be facing right now because of virtual learning. So I haven't heard about all of these things in Arizona specifically, but nationwide, we're hearing about kids who are, wearing pajamas on their Zoom class. Is that something your child's going to get disciplined for? Is it appropriate for them to be disciplined, especially an exclusionary type of discipline because of what they're wearing, if they're showing up and trying to engage? Another possibility, background noises or disruption. Not all kids have their own room or have their own space where it's going to be quiet and they're going to be able to concentrate. There may be siblings in the background. There could be parents, construction workers, who knows what's going on. Another thing we've heard about are objects. So a kiddo has a BB gun in their room at home. That is something that they would face discipline for if they brought it to school, but they're at home, but it's visible to their peers and their teachers. So what do we do in that situation? Something we are hearing a lot more about is cyberbullying. So kids have the ability to chat or email with one another. They're not getting teased in person, but maybe their peers can see into their bedroom and are making fun of, whatever, what they're wearing, where they live, what they own. So there is bullying happening that way. Some kiddos might be embarrassed or have anxiety about turning on their microphone or video. So you're seeing kids get in trouble for that. And then of course, I think the biggest one is kids who just aren't engaging at all. They're failing to log in, and the school district or charter is what we call 10-day dropping them, meaning they have not attended for 10 days in a row. And so they're being completely disenrolled from the district. Now they don't have access to the classroom at all or any learning. So what do we do in those situations? So just some quick ideas. First, constant communication between the teacher or school and the parent. If your child is experiencing issues, especially related to their disability, and if you're having trouble getting in touch with or communicating with their teacher, loop in someone at the district level, the director of special ed. If your child has a case manager, make sure they know what's going on. If your child's specifically struggling with this new virtual environment, think about if you should request an IEP meeting for your child to add new supports or services or accommodations specific to the virtual learning. So if your child has a lot of anxiety, maybe a new accommodation to throw on the IEP is that they're allowed to leave their video off as long as they are, typing in the chat box regularly to demonstrate their engagement. Like I said, there may be some new rules. How have things changed, especially as kids are going back to school, if they need to be wearing masks, if they need to be social distancing? What are the new rules so that you as a parent can reiterate them to the child and make sure that your child is being disciplined for things that are actual rules and not, newly made up things, right? So you can always ask to see a copy of the student code of conduct from the district or charter. You can also ask to look at that in order to understand your child's due process rights, not only if they have a disability, but in general, if they're facing discipline, there should be some type of hearing and opportunity for them to present evidence that they were in line with the code of conduct. So asking for a copy of that can be really helpful. If you're able to look online, the Arizona School Board Association doesn't house the policies for every district and charter, but it does for quite a few of them. So if you Google Arizona School Board Association district policy, you may be able to pull that up online without even having to ask. But of course, if you ask the district, they should produce that to you. If your child is being disciplined and it's informal, so the teacher says, you're done for the day, I'm kicking you out, you've been too disruptive, document the time that the child is missing so that you can think through when you're going to need to request a manifestation determination, add it up. So if your child gets to 10 days because they're constantly being asked to leave the class, you are aware of how much time they've missed. Another thing that we hear about, and we know about the technology divide, that's maybe very old fashioned at this point. Way back in May, we were talking about, the technological divide, but we still have some families who struggle to get their kids online. And it's not that the child is willfully refusing, it's that they don't have a good connection. I struggle, I hope I haven't frozen yet today, but I struggle all the time with webinars. I'm constantly freezing. So, maybe it's their internet connection, maybe they just don't understand how the software or the hardware works. So if there's something that you need help with as a parent because you don't know what to do, or the student is struggling and you think they might need additional coaching or services to help them understand what they need to do, request that help from the district. And again, put it in writing. As a lawyer, I'm always going to tell you, put everything in writing, email it, and ask for that support. And then, of course, if you think your child has been removed, a change of placement related to discipline for 10 or more days, then you should request that manifestation determination we talked about. Super quick, because we are out of time. When your kiddo does go back to school, like I said, there may be new rules related to COVID. You may have the choice between in-person and virtual removed from you. If your kiddo can't follow mask requirements or other policy rules, the school may say, well, then you have to go back to virtual until either we're all back in person and virtual isn't an option anymore, or until you can figure out how to wear a mask. So, that's a possibility. And then of course, I expect that for a lot of our kids, this long absence from school, coupled with people they know getting sick and ill and being stuck inside and wearing masks, it's been traumatic for so many people. Some kiddos' parents may have lost jobs. Some kiddos may have relatives who've passed away or been hospitalized. So there's going to be a lot of trauma. That's the unescapable reality of this. And I expect it to impact in-person behavior when kids come back to school. I think that's just a reality we should all, accept now and start planning for. So again, quick solutions, an IEP meeting. Do we need to add supports or services or accommodations? If your kiddo won't wear a mask, do they need a new FBA, functional behavioral assessment, targeting that problem behavior of refusal to wear a mask? And then we're going to create a behavior intervention system like Dr. Gulchak talked about, where we're constantly positively reinforcing them when they are wearing the mask. There's maybe a token economy or some kind of reinforcement system so that they feel rewarded when they're following the rule. And for certain students, we are going to have to build in some accommodations. They might need more frequent mask breaks, a chance to go outside, go for a walk without their mask, whatever it might be. But we want to try and support them, support their behavior so they can be in person, because we know most kids, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but most kids are going to learn much more effectively when they are back in person, and we want to get back to that normalcy as quick as we can. So how are we going to support them so they can stay in that environment safely? For some kids, it's a family consideration, and most families are being given an option right now about whether to stick with virtual or go back to in-person. Think it through. What really is in your child's best interest right now? Would they be doing better to stick with virtual at this time? Of course, if you have disagreements with what a decision the school has made, exhaust all your informal dispute resolution options, but you do have more formal dispute resolution options through the Arizona Department of Education. You can ask for a facilitated IEP, a mediation, and if needed, you could file a due process complaint. You always have that right. Another option, if you feel like your child is being excluded or options are being taken away from your child on the basis of their disability, consider filing a complaint with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. They will investigate allegations of disability-related discrimination. So that is finally the end. I apologize for going over, but that's the contact information for the Arizona Center for Disability Law. Our website is, we're hoping to revamp it soon, but if you're able to go on and navigate through it a little bit, we do have quite a few resources around special ed, around COVID. So feel free to check that out. And then if you are in need of legal help, you can call that phone number and complete an intake with our office. And we do telephonic intakes Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from 9 to 1. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Thank you so much. I see Lori Bird from ADE put into the chat, you can request mediation whether or not you've filed for due process or a state complaint. That's right. And I'm an attorney, and I consistently use mediation before even having filed a complaint because it is a really good tool. It gets sort of that objective third person in the room to help identify, tensions can be high with parents in schools when things are not going well. So having that third objective person who knows a little bit about special ed in the room to facilitate, get to the core of the problem, and then try to come to a compromise can be incredibly helpful. So I definitely recommend that parents and teachers, teachers in schools can request it too. If you're not able to cope with this a parent and you think it would be helpful, I think you can request it. Definitely a facilitated IEP and mediation as well. And it is a free service, so it's not something you're paying for. All right. I don't know. I saw some people sharing some great information. A couple quick questions. Are there penalties for school officials if they don't comply with the law? So Roy, what I was sharing is that if, for example, the manifestation determination isn't held in a timely manner, the parent or anyone with knowledge of that failure to adhere to the manifestation determination requirement can file what's called a state complaint with the Arizona Department of Ed. ADE does monitoring as well, so they are going out and checking records to make sure that this federal law is being followed. But really, parents are the core of, they're the drivers of enforcement. So if a parent or advocate is aware that something wrong is happening, they're going to have to bring it to the attention of the Department of Ed, either by filing a state complaint, or if it's a substantive disagreement, you could try mediation or due process request. And Anne had asked, does this apply to the online class environment? Are there protections for being dropped due to the 10-day drop policy? So I mean, it's tough. I will say I had a kiddo who everyone knew. We were all on the same page. She had an emotional disability. She was not going to log in. And luckily, because I was involved, they had to 10-day drop her. And part of that is, I think, school finance related, that they are not supposed to be getting paid for kids who they're not actually serving. But they had to 10-day drop her because she hadn't logged in for more than 10 days. But because we knew she had a disability, we were continuing to do evaluations. We were continuing to have IEP meetings to try to come up with solutions. So even though they dropped her, they still recognized their responsibility to figure out her needs and provide her FAPE. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's no exception as far as I know. And if Lori wants to jump in, there's no exception as far as I know to that 10-day drop policy. And so one thing you could do is ask the school, what is your attendance policy right now? How are you logging attendance for this child in times of virtual learning? Is it just one login? Do they have to be chatting? Do they have to have their video on? Because I think each district has been able to set their own attendance policies. Donna asked, are parents given this information? Yes, we do know your rights trainings all the time. There's so much interest in this particular topic. I think we'll be doing a lot more behavior and discipline training. So yes, parents are made aware of this. It's also in their procedural safeguards. But yeah, our office and Raising Special Kids, we do a lot of know your rights type trainings. Okay, I'm gonna stop because I've taken up far too much of everyone's time. Oh, got it. Okay, Lori typed in there is a chronic illness exception, but you know, that's something you could explore with the school if your child has COVID or has another chronic illness. All right, so since I've got my mic on, I will go ahead and wrap it up for everybody. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join us today. I know it was a little longer than advertised, but this was incredible to see so much interest. Thank you to the Arizona Developmental Disability Network for putting this on. Jeff, John, and Nick for all your tech support, our lovely ASL interpreters, we appreciate you. And of course, Dr. Gulchak, thank you so much for your expertise, your willingness to share so many great resources. We really, really appreciate it. And like we said, Jeff is going to be sending out, I think via email, the presentations and links to the resources. So if you weren't able to, you know, gather all this information today or grab the links out of the chat, you will get it via email if you registered. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe out there.